The frost comes first, then the silence, then death. December 17th, 1941, 4:37 a.m. Temperature, minus 18 degrees Celsius. A German patrol moves through the ruins of what used to be a residential district in Sevastopol. 14 men, fresh replacements from the 170th Infantry Division. They've been told the city is nearly theirs. They've been told Soviet resistance is collapsing. They've been told wrong. The first man falls without a sound. His companion doesn't notice immediately. The crack of the rifle shot arrives a half second after the bullet, echoing off broken walls so that its origin becomes impossible to place. By the time the patrol realizes they're under fire, 3 more are down. The survivors scatter. They press themselves into doorways, behind rubble, into the skeletal remains of apartment buildings where families once slept. Their breath makes white clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. They scan rooftops, windows, shadows. Nothing moves. The wind pushes snow across empty streets in serpentine patterns. A lieutenant named Klaus Reinhardt tries to organize a response. He's 23 years old. He's been in the Soviet Union for 6 months. He's seen friends die in the endless forests outside Moscow, watched frostbite claim fingers and toes, survived the brutal realization that this war would not be over by Christmas. But this is different. This is surgical, invisible. Another man drops, then another. Each shot comes from a different angle, or seems to. The patrol can't tell anymore. Panic sets in like the cold. They return fire blindly, wasting ammunition on shadows and fear. Their muzzle flashes give away their positions. More men fall. By as 05 as 02 hours, 9 of the 14 are dead or dying. The survivors abandon their wounded and run. They don't stop running until they are back at their forward command post, where they report being ambushed by a large Soviet force. At least 20 rifles, they say. Maybe 30. Coordinated attack. Professional troops. The investigation begins at dawn. Officers arrive to examine the scene. What they find doesn't match the survivors' story. Every German soldier has been killed by a single shot, head or upper torso. Maximum range, 400 meters. Minimum, 250. The shooting positions form a pattern, not multiple shooters working together. One shooter, moving, hunting. The spent cartridge casings tell the story the men couldn't. 7.62 amphiformas. Soviet standard issue. But the groupings, the precision, the patience. This wasn't suppressing fire or panic shooting. This was craft. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the person who killed 9 German soldiers that morning had been a university student just 5 months earlier, a history major. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 54 kilograms. Her name was Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko. And in 8 months, she would kill 309 enemy combatants, more than any female sniper in recorded history. But to understand how a 25-year-old woman from a small Ukrainian town could become one of the deadliest snipers of the Second World War, you have to understand what that war looked like from the Soviet side in 1941. The numbers tell a story of apocalypse. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, they committed 3.8 million troops, 3,350 tanks, and 2,770 aircraft to the invasion. The Soviet Union wasn't just caught off guard. It was nearly decapitated. Stalin's purges had gutted the officer corps. His non-aggression pact with Hitler had created a false sense of security. His refusal to believe intelligence warnings meant Soviet forces were deployed for training exercises, not defensive operations. The Wehrmacht advanced with terrifying speed. They covered 50 kilometers a day. They encircled entire Soviet armies. In the first 3 weeks, they captured 287,704 prisoners, destroyed 2,585 tanks, and eliminated 1,483 aircraft. Minsk fell. Smolensk fell. Kiev was surrounded. 3 million Soviet soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in the first 3 months. The world watched and assumed the Soviet Union would collapse before winter. British intelligence gave them 6 weeks. American analysts weren't much more optimistic, but the world had underestimated Soviet capacity for sacrifice. The Soviet Union didn't just have men to spare, Though at a population of 190 million, they had demographic depth Germany couldn't match. They had something else, a willingness to absorb catastrophic losses and keep fighting, a history of suffering that had prepared them in some terrible way for this exact moment. And they had people like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who would prove that ordinary citizens could become extraordinary soldiers when their homeland burned. In August 1941, the Soviet government issued a mobilization order unlike any before it, not just men, everyone. Women could volunteer for combat roles. Not support positions, not nursing, combat. The decree was born of desperation, but it opened a door that most societies kept firmly locked. The Soviet Union would eventually deploy 820,000 women in uniform during the war. Many served as medics, radio operators, and support personnel. But over 2,000 women served as snipers, and none would be more lethal than the university student from Bila Tserkva. This is the story of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, but it's also the story of what happens when doctrine meets desperation, when privilege meets terror, and when a woman with a gift for precision enters a war that rewarded patience and punished mistakes. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born on July 12, 1916, in Bila Tserkva, a town 75 kilometers south of Kiev. Her father worked at the Makarov steel plant. Her mother was a factory worker. They weren't party elite. They weren't military. They were Soviet working class, the people who built tractors and railway lines, and believed the promises about a better future for their children. She was a slight child with dark hair and serious eyes. Her teachers remembered her as focused, determined, the kind of student who asked follow-up questions. By the time she was 14, she'd developed a competitive streak that bordered on obsessive. A friend, a boy named Leonid, bragged about joining a shooting club. He suggested girls couldn't shoot as well as boys. Biology, he said. Muscle mass. Focus under pressure. Lyudmila joined the Oso Aviakim shooting club the next week. The Society for the Promotion of Defense and Aviation Chemical Development of the USSR, a mouthful of Soviet bureaucracy that basically meant train civilians for war. The clubs taught marksmanship, first aid, basic tactics. They were common in the 1930s, part of the Soviet Union's obsession with military preparedness. Most members treated it as a hobby. Lyudmila treated it as competition. She had a gift. Her instructors noticed it immediately. Not just steady hands or good eyesight, those helped, but the real gift was patience, the ability to wait, to ignore cold, discomfort, the urge to move. Most shooters got bored, they rushed shots, they shifted position. Lyudmila could lie motionless for hours, her breathing so slow it barely disturbed the rifle, her focus so complete that the world narrowed to crosshairs and target. By 1937, she'd earned a Voroshilov sharpshooter badge. By 1940, she'd moved to Kiev to study history at Kiev University. She wanted to be a historian. She wanted to teach. She fell in love with a fellow student named Alexei Pavlichenko. They married. She kept his surname even after he left to join the army in early 1941. She was finishing her 4th year when Germany invaded. On June 22, 1941, Lyudmila was studying for final exams. By June 23rd, she was at a recruiting station. The recruitment officer looked at her like she'd made a mistake. He suggested nursing, field kitchens, radio operations, anything but infantry. She told him about her marksmanship credentials. He asked her to prove it. They took her to a range. They gave her a Mosin Nagant rifle and pointed at targets 300 meters away. She put 5 shots into a grouping smaller than her fist. She was assigned to the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division as a sniper. August 1941. Private Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Serial number in some dusty archive. She was issued a standard Mosin Nagant 1891-30 rifle with a PE scope. Weight, 4 kilograms. Length, 1.23 meters. Effective range, 500 meters with iron sights, 800 with optics. It was the same rifle millions of Soviet soldiers carried, but in her hands, it would become something else entirely. When Lyudmila Pavlichenko arrived at the siege of Odessa in August 1941, she was one of 2,000 female snipers the Soviet Union would eventually deploy. But she was also entering a tactical environment that rewarded her specific skills better than almost any other combat role. The Wehrmacht operated on principles of maneuver warfare, speed, combined arms, tactical flexibility. Their officers were trained to make independent decisions. Their NCOs led from the front. This made them lethal in open country, but it also created vulnerability. German doctrine concentrated decision-making authority in specific individuals. Kill those individuals, and units became confused, hesitant. And German uniforms made those individuals easy to identify. Officers wore different insignia. They carried maps and binoculars. They stood slightly apart from enlisted men. Soviet snipers were trained to exploit this. They weren't just shooters. They were battlefield assassins. Priority targets: officers, NCOs, machine gunners, mortar crews, artillery observers, radio operators. Anyone whose death would disproportionately degrade enemy capability. But Lyudmila had advantages beyond training. When she was offered the standard Mosin Nagant with a PU scope, the newer model being issued to snipers in late 1941, she refused. She kept her older PE-scoped rifle. Her instructors questioned this. The PU was simpler, more rugged, easier to maintain. Why reject it? She had 3 reasons. First, the PE scope sat slightly higher on the rifle, giving her a more natural cheek weld, a small detail, but comfort mattered when you spent hours in position. Second, the PE's eye relief. The distance between the scope and her eye was 4 millimeters longer than the PU. This kept the scope from striking her face during recoil, critical in rapid follow-up shots. Third, and most important, she'd spent 4 years practicing with a PE-scoped rifle. She knew its quirks. She knew how to compensate for its minor parallax issues at certain distances. She knew, instinctively, where bullets would land. Like Simo Heiha, the Finnish sniper who'd killed over 500 Soviet soldiers using iron sights during the Winter War, Lyudmila understood that mastery of a specific weapon mattered more than theoretical superiority of equipment. Heiha had refused a scope because it raised his profile and created glint. Lyudmila kept her PE scope because she'd internalized its characteristics. Both chose familiarity over fashion. Both proved that expertise with adequate equipment beats unfamiliarity with superior equipment. She made one other modification that bordered on unorthodox. She wrapped her rifle barrel in white cloth in winter, green burlap in summer. This wasn't standard, it was improvisation. The barrel wrap broke up the rifle's outline, diffused heat shimmer, and absorbed sound slightly. Soviet doctrine didn't forbid it, but it didn't encourage it either. Lyudmila didn't care about doctrine, she cared about results. By September 1941, she had those results. On September 8, 1941, at 13:20 hours, Lyudmila Pavlichenko faced her first test. The 25th Rifle Division was dug in along the Grigorievka River northwest of Odessa. Romanian forces, Germany's allies, were probing Soviet defenses, testing for weak points before a major assault. The temperature was 22 degrees Celsius, clear skies, light wind from the southeast at 8 kilometers per hour, good shooting conditions. Lyudmila had been in position since 0600 hours. 6 hours, no food. Water sipped sparingly, a shallow scrape in the earth behind a fallen poplar tree. Foliage arranged to break her silhouette. Her spotter, a sergeant named Nikolai Kovrov, lay beside her with binoculars. They hadn't spoken in 3 hours. Speech created movement. Movement created death. Romanian troops appeared at 13:18 hours. A patrol, 15 men. They moved carelessly, bunched together, talking. They were 50 kilometers from their homeland. Many had been farmers. They didn't want this war. But they were here anyway, allies of Germany, pressing against Soviet lines. Kovrov whispered, "Officer, second from left, 280 meters." Lyudmila saw him, a lieutenant, young, probably early 20s. He was gesturing, pointing toward the Soviet lines, explaining something to his men. He wore his rank insignia clearly. His posture suggested confidence. He thought he was safe. Her crosshairs settled on his chest. Center mass. The PE scope's reticle, a simple cross with range marks, bisected him perfectly. She exhaled slowly, let her breath settle, found the natural pause between heartbeats. The Mosin Nagant's trigger pull was roughly 4 pounds. She'd trained herself to apply pressure so smoothly that the moment of firing surprised her. No anticipation, no flinch, just smooth, inevitable release. The rifle bucked. The sound rolled across the open ground. The lieutenant dropped. Chaos erupted. The Romanian patrol scattered. They returned fire wildly, aiming at nothing, hitting nothing. Lyudmila had already shifted position, moving 3 meters right, using the fallen tree as cover. She chambered another round. The Mosin Nagant's bolt action was slower than semi-automatic rifles, but in trained hands it was fast enough. 2 seconds to cycle, 2 seconds to acquire a new target. A sergeant was trying to organize the patrol. He was shouting, pointing. He was 320 meters away. Extreme range for a body shot with iron sights. Comfortable with a scope. She fired. He fell. The patrol broke. They abandoned their dead and ran. Lyudmila watched them through her scope until they disappeared into tree cover. Then she waited. Movement now would be fatal. Enemy sharpshooters might be watching, waiting for her to expose herself. She remained motionless for another 40 minutes before withdrawing. 2 kills. Her first combat engagement. The rifle's barrel was warm against her hand. The smell of gunpowder hung in the still air. She felt no elation, no horror, just a strange, hollow satisfaction that her training had worked, that the months at the range, the hours of practice, the obsessive focus on technique had translated into results. That night, back at battalion headquarters, her company commander asked for a kill count. She said 2. He nodded, made a notation in a logbook, and moved on. No congratulations, no ceremony. Snipers were tools, kills were data. The Red Army was being destroyed across a 1,000-kilometer front. 2 dead Romanians barely registered, but word spread anyway. The other snipers in her unit heard. They'd been wondering about the girl from Kiev, the university student, whether she could actually shoot, whether she'd freeze when bullets were incoming, whether she'd last a week. She lasted longer than that. By October 1941, Lyudmila had killed 37 enemy soldiers. By November, the count reached 121. She wasn't just surviving, she was excelling, and the Germans were noticing. Wehrmacht intelligence officers compiled reports from frontline units around Odessa. A pattern emerged. Officer casualties were abnormally high in sectors facing the 25th Rifle Division. Experienced NCOs were dying at rates that exceeded statistical norms. Patrols reported invisible shooters, single shots, long range, high accuracy. German countermeasures intensified. They deployed their own snipers. They began avoiding predictable routes. They stopped bunching together during patrols. Officers removed their insignia or wore enlisted uniforms. They understood they were being hunted. Lyudmila adapted. If officers hid their rank, she watched for behavior. Who gave orders? Who held maps? Who used binoculars? Those men died. If patrols spread out, she targeted machine gunners first. Their weapons were distinctive. Their positions gave them away. If Germans deployed snipers, she hunted them. She learned to spot scope glint, unnatural foliage patterns, firing positions that offered good fields of fire. The math of sniping favored her. She could take 3, 4, 5 shots before needing to reposition. Each shot reduced enemy effectiveness. Each death created fear, hesitation. German infantry began refusing to volunteer for patrols. They nicknamed the sector Devil's Mile. They traded rumors about phantom shooters. Some said it was a man, a ghost, a supernatural punishment for invading Russia. They never suspected it was a woman who weighed 54 kilograms and had wanted to be a history teacher. On November 4th, 1941, the situation changed. The Soviet defenders of Odessa received evacuation orders. The city couldn't hold. The Black Sea Fleet would extract the garrison and redeploy them to Sevastopol, the fortress city in Crimea that would become one of the war's longest and bloodiest sieges. Lyudmila boarded a transport ship with her rifle, her ammunition, and a kill count of 143. Sevastopol would test her in ways Odessa hadn't. The siege began in October 1941 and wouldn't end until July 1942. 9 months. 250,000 Soviet troops defending against a German force that grew to 200,000. The city became a symbol. Stalin declared it would never fall. Hitler declared it must. Between those two declarations, men died in numbers that defy comprehension. Lyudmila arrived as part of the defensive reinforcement. The The 25th Rifle Division was integrated into the Sevastopol garrison. She was assigned hunting zones, specific sectors where she'd operate independently, targeting enemy officers and specialists. The terrain favored snipers. Urban ruins provided concealment. German positions were close enough that she could observe routines, identify targets, plan shots. But the intensity was unlike anything she'd experienced. This wasn't probing attacks and withdrawals. This was industrial-scale warfare. Artillery barrages that lasted hours. Assaults in company and battalion strength. Airstrikes, tank attacks, chemical warfare. She learned to work under conditions that would have paralyzed most shooters. She learned to fire between artillery impacts, using the noise to mask her shots. She learned to identify German officers by their posture and movement, since they'd stopped wearing obvious insignia. She learned to sleep 3 hours a night and function on adrenaline and black bread, and she learned to kill with efficiency that bordered on mechanical. December 1941. Kill count reaches 197. January 1942, 223. February 1942, 257. She was killing, on average, 2 enemy soldiers per day. This wasn't sustainable. No one could maintain that operational tempo indefinitely. But she kept going. Other Soviet snipers were fighting with equal ferocity. Nina Lobkovskaya, another woman, would eventually kill 89 Germans. Lyuba Makarova, 84. Vladimir Pichilintsev would reach over 400 kills. But Lyudmila's numbers, combined with the fact that she was a woman, made her valuable for propaganda. The Soviet government needed heroes. They needed stories to counter the narrative of inevitable German victory. In March 1942, Soviet journalists arrived at Sevastopol. They wanted to interview her. She refused. They insisted. Command made it an order. She gave brief factual answers. No, she didn't hate Germans as individuals. Yes, she felt fear. No, killing didn't come easily. But she'd seen what German forces did to Soviet civilians. She'd heard the reports from occupied territories. Executions, starvation, enslavement. This wasn't abstract. This was defense of her homeland. Squeamishness was a luxury she couldn't afford. The interviews made her uncomfortable, but they served a purpose. The Soviet Union needed to project strength. A woman killing hundreds of German soldiers violated Nazi ideology so completely that it became powerful propaganda. The Germans believed women were weak. They believed Slavs were subhuman. Lyudmila was both, and she was systematically dismantling their forces one shot at a time. German intelligence obtained her name in April 1942. They distributed leaflets offering safe passage if she defected. They broadcast radio messages directed at her personally. They promised she'd be treated well. They suggested she'd become famous. She read the leaflets with amusement. The Germans were scared. Good. Fear degraded combat effectiveness as surely as casualties. By May 1942, her kill count had reached 287. She'd been in combat for 9 months. She'd survived artillery barrages, airstrikes, close-quarters combat when German infantry overran Soviet positions, and she'd had to fight with a pistol. She'd seen friends die. She'd been wounded twice by shrapnel, minor injuries that hadn't required evacuation. She was exhausted to the cellular level, but she kept working, because the alternative was German victory. And German victory meant her country destroyed, her people enslaved, everything she'd known erased. On May 19th, 1942, at 1445 hours, Lyudmila was in position northeast of the Severnaya Bay, overlooking German assembly areas for an anticipated assault. Clear weather, temperature 28 degrees, light breeze. She'd been in position since dawn, 7 hours. Her spotter had rotated out for food and rest. She was alone. German infantry began massing at 1430 hours. She could see officers directing troops, pointing at Soviet lines, coordinating with forward observers. Target-rich environment. She selected an officer standing near a radio operator. 400 meters, elevated position, slight upward angle required trajectory compensation. She fired. The officer dropped. She chambered another round, shifted aim, fired again. A second officer. German troops scattered. She repositioned, moved 5 meters left, found new cover. They'd try to locate her now. counter-battery fire, mortars probably. She had maybe 30 seconds. She used 15. 2 more shots, 2 more kills. Then she slithered backward, keeping low, using rubble for concealment. Mortar rounds began impacting her previous position 10 seconds later. They plastered the area with high explosive. If she'd stayed, she'd be dead. She moved to a fallback position 300 meters away, a basement of a destroyed building, dark, cool, safe for the moment. She waited for the barrage to lift, then moved again, circling around to a different angle on the same German assembly area. This was the pattern: shoot, move, survive, repeat. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The kill count climbed: 290, 295, 300, and then June arrived. And with it, the moment that should have ended her war. June 7th, 1942. Rs 820 hours. Lyudmila was observing German positions from a damaged apartment building. 3rd floor, windows blown out, good sight lines. She'd used this position twice before. Dangerous. Returning to the same location violated basic fieldcraft. But the approaching German assault left few options. Every shooter was needed. She was tracking a German machine gun team when she heard the whistle. Artillery. Incoming. She had 2 seconds to recognize the sound, 1 second to move. Not enough. The shell impacted the building's 2nd floor. The explosion traveled upward. Shrapnel, concrete fragments, steel rebar. The building's structure, already compromised, began to collapse. Lyudmila was thrown backward by the blast wave. She hit a wall. Something struck her face. Multiple impacts across her body, ringing in her ears so loud it drowned out the continuing bombardment. She lay in darkness, unable to move, uncertain if she was dying. Dust choked her. Blood filled her mouth. She tried to assess her injuries, but her body wouldn't respond properly. Her left arm. Something wrong with her left arm. Pain radiating from her face, her ribs, her legs. But no arterial bleeding. She wasn't dead yet. Time became uncertain. Minutes. Hours. She heard Soviet voices. Someone was pulling rubble away. Hands grabbed her. She tried to speak but couldn't. They lifted her. Movement brought fresh waves of pain. She lost consciousness. She woke in a field hospital. A medic was examining her. His expression suggested surprise that she was alive. The triage tag on her jacket read, Priority 2, serious but stable. She learned later what that meant. They'd expected her to die overnight. They'd been wrong. The damage inventory was extensive. Severe concussion, facial wounds from shrapnel, 4 broken ribs, compound fracture of her left forearm, multiple contusions and lacerations, partial hearing loss in her left ear. She'd been lucky. The same blast had killed 6 other Soviet soldiers in the building, but the shrapnel that should have killed her had been deflected by rubble. The collapse that should have crushed her had created a pocket of survival space. Recovery was measured in weeks. Bones healed slowly. Concussion symptoms, headaches, nausea, sensitivity to light, lasted longer. The hearing loss was permanent. But worse than the physical damage was the enforced idleness. While she lay in a hospital bed, the siege continued. Her unit fought without her. People died while she recuperated. Medical staff suggested she'd never return to combat. The concussion alone was disqualifying. The arm fracture needed months to heal properly. Her shooting hand was fine, but recoil management required both arms. Regulations said she was done. She refused to accept that assessment. As soon as she could walk without falling, she began improvising rehabilitation. As soon as the cast came off her arm, she started strength training. As soon as the headaches became manageable, she practiced dry firing her rifle, building back muscle memory. The medical officers shook their heads. Command approved her return to duty in July. She had 300 kills by then. They needed her. The siege was intensifying, but she never made it back to Sevastopol's front lines. While she was recovering, orders came from Moscow. She was being evacuated, not for medical reasons, for propaganda purposes. The Soviet government had decided she was more valuable alive than dead, more valuable as a symbol than as a sniper. In August 1942, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was pulled from Sevastopol and sent on a diplomatic tour, first to America, then to Britain. the Soviet Union's most lethal female sniper, would become its most visible advocate for opening a second front in Europe. She hated every minute of it. The American tour began in Washington, D.C. Eleanor Roosevelt hosted her. Press conferences were arranged. She gave speeches written by Soviet officials, delivered through translators, urging America to invade Western Europe to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union. She wore her uniform with her medals, Order of Lenin, 2 orders of the Red Banner. She was 26 years old and had killed more enemy combatants than most infantry companies. American journalists asked condescending questions. How does it feel to kill? Do you wear makeup at the front? Don't you think combat is unfeminine? She answered with icy patience that her country was being destroyed, that millions of Soviet civilians were dying, that while Americans debated propriety, German forces were murdering her people. She was polite, barely. One speech, delivered at the International Student Assembly in Washington, cut through the diplomatic niceties. She spoke directly. Gentlemen, I am 26 years old. I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long? The audience gave her a standing ovation. Eleanor Roosevelt became a personal friend, but Lyudmila wanted to return to the front. Command refused. She was too valuable, too recognizable. If she was captured, the propaganda value would be enormous. If she was killed, the narrative value would be limited. She was more useful giving speeches than firing shots. The logic was sound. She still hated it. She spent the rest of the war training snipers, giving speeches, representing Soviet heroism. The final kill count stood at 309. 51 were enemy snipers, the most dangerous game. Counter-sniper work required different skills. Those duels could last days, both shooters invisible, both patient, both lethal. Winning meant outsmarting someone equally skilled. Lyudmila won 51 times. Her tactical impact extended beyond individual kills. Wehrmacht units facing her sector developed specific protocols. No officer insignia in frontline positions. Rotating patrol routes, limiting visible coordination, using smokescreens to obscure movement. Accepting higher casualty rates among enlisted men to protect irreplaceable specialists and leaders. These adaptations degraded German operational effectiveness. Removing officer insignia slowed decision-making. Junior officers were less experienced, more hesitant. Enlisted men couldn't always identify who was in command. Patrol route randomization consumed time and limited reconnaissance quality. Smokescreens telegraphed movement and consumed resources. Soviet doctrine evolved partly because of snipers like Lyudmila. The Red Army formalized sniper training programs. They identified traits that predicted success: patience, emotional stability, physical endurance, spatial reasoning. They studied kill reports, identified effective techniques, disseminated best practices. By 1943, Soviet sniper schools were producing graduates who matched German marksmanship quality and exceeded it in fieldcraft and patience. This mattered strategically. The Wehrmacht's officer corps was finite. Germany couldn't replace experienced lieutenants and captains quickly. Each officer killed by a sniper represented months of training lost, tactical knowledge destroyed. Multiplied across thousands of engagements, Soviet snipers degraded German small unit effectiveness measurably. After the war ended in 1945, Lyudmila returned to Kiev. She completed her university degree. She became a historian, as she'd wanted. She taught. She wrote about the war, but sparingly. She didn't glorify combat. She didn't romanticize killing. She wrote clinically, precisely, about tactics and outcomes. She married again, had a son, lived quietly. When journalists found her, she gave brief interviews. She emphasized that she'd done what was necessary. That war was horror, not adventure. That she'd been fortunate to survive when so many others hadn't. Her former spotter, Nikolai Kovrov, survived the war and located her in 1953. They met occasionally. They never spoke about Sevastopol. Some experiences don't translate to peacetime conversation. They simply existed, shared trauma that needed no elaboration. In the 1950s, Soviet authorities awarded her additional honors, Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest decoration. She attended ceremonies, accepted medals, remained uncomfortable with attention. She'd been a soldier. She'd done her job. The machinery of state recognition felt disconnected from the reality she'd experienced. By the 1960s, her health declined. Concussion symptoms that had never fully resolved, hearing loss that worsened, psychological strain from carrying memories of 9 months in Sevastopol. She told a friend once that she sometimes still heard the sound of her rifle, the particular crack of a Mosin Nagant firing, the metallic click of the bolt cycling. She said it wasn't memory. It was as if her body remembered independent of her mind. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died on October 10, 1974, at age 58. Stroke. She was buried at Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow, a resting place for Soviet heroes. Her gravestone is simple: name, dates, hero of the Soviet Union. It doesn't mention the kill count. It doesn't need to. Anyone who knows Soviet military history knows her name. The 309 confirmed kills represent minimum count. Soviet doctrine required independent verification for official records, 2 witnesses or physical evidence. In the chaos of siege warfare, many kills went unverified. Her actual total was likely higher, possibly significantly higher, but 309 is the number that matters. 309 confirmed, 309 documented. 309 enemy combatants who died because a university student from Ukraine refused to let her country fall. Her legacy extends beyond statistics. She proved that women could function in combat roles traditionally reserved for men. She demonstrated that patience and precision could equal aggression and firepower. She showed that defenders, properly motivated and trained, could inflict asymmetric casualties on attackers despite numerical and technological disadvantage. Post-war analysis by military historians identified specific engagements where her kills directly affected battle outcomes. Officers killed before assaults left German units disorganized. Machine gunners eliminated during defensive operations created gaps in suppressing fire. Forward observers killed prevented accurate artillery targeting. Each individual kill was tactical. Collectively, they were strategic. The Soviet Union deployed 2,000 female snipers during World War II. They collectively killed an estimated 12,000 enemy soldiers. That's an average of 6 kills per sniper. Lyudmila's 309 puts her at 50 times the average. Only a handful of Soviet snipers, male or female, exceeded her total. Mikhail Surkov, 702. Ivan Sidorenko, over 500. Fyodor Oklopkov, 429. But among female snipers, she stood alone. No one came close. The Germans never forgot her. After the war, former Wehrmacht officers interviewed by historians mentioned her specifically. They described the psychological impact of knowing they faced female snipers. It violated their ideological assumptions. It created cognitive dissonance. If Soviet women could kill German soldiers this effectively, what did that say about German racial superiority theories? The question lingered, unanswered, uncomfortable. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote about Lyudmila in her autobiography. She described a young woman who'd seen too much death but remained fundamentally humane, who killed because not killing meant German victory, who wanted nothing more than to return to normal life. Roosevelt noted that American audiences initially dismissed Lyudmila as propaganda. Then they heard her speak, saw her medals, learned her story, understood that propaganda can be factually accurate. In the decades after her death, Lyudmila became a symbol for various causes. Feminists cited her as evidence of female capability in male-dominated fields. Military analysts studied her tactics. Russian nationalists claimed her as evidence of Soviet superiority. She would have hated all of it. She'd said repeatedly that she wasn't a symbol. She was a soldier who did what circumstances required. But symbols aren't chosen. They're recognized. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the university student who wanted to teach history, became history herself. A reminder that war transforms ordinary people into extraordinary actors, that survival sometimes requires skills you never wanted to develop, that precision and patience can defeat aggression and force, that a woman with a rifle and 309 confirmed kills can change the trajectory of battles, influence military doctrine, and prove that courage isn't gendered. She fired approximately 400 shots to achieve 309 kills. This implies a hit rate exceeding 77% under combat conditions. For comparison, modern military snipers consider 50% combat accuracy excellent. She was operating above elite standards with equipment that would be considered obsolete today, under siege conditions, while being actively hunted by enemy snipers. The most Nagant rifle she used is now displayed in a Moscow military museum. Visitors can see the weapon that killed 309 enemy soldiers. The barrel shows wear patterns from thousands of rounds fired. The stock bears scratches and dents from months of field work. The PE scope, carefully preserved, still holds its zero. It's a relic, but it's also testimony. This rifle in those hands, under those circumstances, changed outcomes. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.